Be positive. It's not just a blood type. Thank you. Try the veal. Well, hey there. Welcome back to our continuing mini-series on states of being. Today's state of being is positivity. At first glance, you may think, well, that's not really a state of being that deserves to be with autism and ADHD and so forth, but I believe it is, because it is something that is markedly different than the quote-unquote average person experiences. Positivity isn't just being nice or putting up with crap that maybe you shouldn't put up with. Positivity isn't just being positive blindly. In fact, I addressed that in a podcast called Blind Positivity. Positivity is a state of being in which your base level is extremely positive with lots of energy. It's not so much a filter, but an understanding of the ups and downs and really the weights of them in a way that other people don't. All of us have been in a situation in which we've been surrounded by negativity, whether it was a prevailing feeling or it was more than one person that we worked with because of conditions or a group, organization, what have you. We can all remember those. We can remember avoiding the negative person or people. We know not to mention things to people like that and so forth, but it's a little harder to remember that positive person. And it's typically person and not persons because they are fairly rare. They're the people that at first you're kind of suspicious of because you think, okay, you're not really taking this to heart. Is this a joke to you? Like you're not listening to me because the reaction is really positive, or they always seem to be smiling, or they're always really nice to you. So they must want something. But in fact, the opposite's true. They don't want anything. They just appreciate you and life and everything else. The reality of positivity is that you can't help it, and that you do tend to notice that you are surrounded by people who aren't positive. You're more likely to see things as they are, as in the bigger picture, as in the not sweating the small stuff, and etc. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, you see the completion of things, you see the possibility, you see the potential. It can get a bit daunting when you don't know people who are positive, when everyone else just tends to dip into the negative on everything or give you the oh woe is me thing. And I'm not saying that it's not part of the human condition to have ups and downs. It is. There are ups and downs in life. We experience pain and suffering. We experience curiosity. We experience happiness and pleasure and so forth, all by design. It's what life is made of, besides the time, energy, and resources that I so often talk about. My experience with positivity has been more than enough to fill up several episodes, but I am again going to try to keep this to about 10 minutes for you. I have said that the people who I have found to be the most positive are almost always without fail the people who have gone through the worst times, the people who have experienced the tragic and the horror things in life. And they seem to be super happy. And my explanation for that, including myself, is that they know where their scale is set. They know where 0 is, I have said. They know that if they're having a 7-day, let's say 10 is the best day in the universe and 0 is the worst day ever. If they're having a 7-day and they have a minor setback, their day becomes a 6.9. It doesn't become a 1. I have a story to relate to put this in perspective, and you have to pardon the impression I'm about to do, but I need to do the impression to make the story make the most sense. One of my clients a while back was a gentleman, an older gentleman who walked with a cane. He essentially shambled around. His vocalizations and face contorted a bit when he spoke. He was the nicest man I had ever met. We had lovely chats. And one day, he sort of recounted a quick story to me. And this is what I want to recount to you to prove the point. Again, pardon my impression of him, but it's what drives the point home. So I asked him, "How are you today?" And he said, "I'm great." And then it immediately made him think about that because I said, "I'm great too." And he said, "Well, we're all great." And he said he had just talked to someone who was relatively a new hire. She was a secretary, very young. And he asked her how she was doing. And she said she had a cold. And he said it with humor and disgust at the same time. "Mark," she said, "she had a cold. I have a cold." And hearing that in his voice was driving home the irony of how devastated she was to have the sniffles while he was shambling around, barely able to walk with his cane, but paid no mind to that because he was a positive person. And I think people see positivity only when it's challenged. I mean, if you go out for a drink with a friend, for the most part, if it's the right setting and so forth, and there's no pressing matters, everyone's going to seem like a positive person, especially after some alcohol. But it's the people that go through some difficult times and they still seem to be happy is where you see that. My personal experience can sort of be summed up in 4 words, that life is a joke. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean, sometimes I see the big joke of life. Sometimes you get a joke played on you, and it's funny. Example is, I don't recall whether it was something I got from a restaurant or something I had meticulously prepared for myself, but it was an awesome dinner. Then there were more than enough leftovers. There was 1.5 meals left over, which for me meant it was going to be 1 meal, because why not? And so I was thinking about it all morning. And so I went to the refrigerator and I thought, okay, time's up. I'm tired of dreaming about this. I opened the refrigerator and the tray that it was in launched out in such a way that the cover popped off. It couldn't have been more perfect in this ballet of tragedy. And it popped off and fell face down, splat right on the floor in front of me. It was totally wasted. There was no 5-second rule because it was a casserole-like item. And I just looked at it, and this hunger and this want and desire that I had had for this. And I started laughing because it felt like a joke had been played on me. It was a joke. Now, obviously, I could have put it in better, more properly into the refrigerator, right? So I sort of played a joke on myself, and it was just funny because it was the thing I wanted more than anything else at that second was the thing that fell onto the floor. And I laughed out loud like a crazy person standing in my kitchen alone as I looked down at it. Ha ha ha. Like, it was just, if someone saw that, they'd think, okay, that was it. It drove them off the deep end. Good night, everyone. But it didn't. It just made me laugh. And the laughter got me through cleaning it up. And I figured out what else, because I knew it wasn't life or death. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. My 7.5 day now became a 7.4. I mean, that was it. I think because of that, I've also developed another phrase, and one of my phrases is, if this is the worst thing that happens to me today, I'm going to have a very good day. And I've said that when I've interacted with people who provide, goods and services and what have you, and something goes wrong and they're apologetic about it. And I say to them, because sometimes they're overly apologetic and I can tell it's affecting them and they're really bothered by the fact that something failed or I didn't get something on time. And I say, look, if this is the worst thing that happens to me today, I'm going to have a good day. This doesn't mean that I am an unfeeling robot incapable of feeling sad. It doesn't mean that at all. You can be a positive person and still experience sadness, depression, and depression into the depths of which you feel like you're never going to return. Because we are human beings. And like I said, we experience the highs and the lows. If you're experiencing nothing, to me, that's worse. And it's one of the reasons why I'm going to make a statement that's a little controversial in a little bit. And before I go to that, there's an element to positivity that I've experienced that I realized in working through this, it deserves its own podcast episode. So it might be the next episode. It might be one coming up soon, but listen for it. This is the part in which I go through my format and say coping with and the state of being. And this is where I would say coping with positivity. Well, do you cope with positivity? Well, I guess you do. Because as I said previously, if you are a very positive person, you can be taken advantage of. And I bet you know this in your circles, whether it's your family, your friends, or your work, in which you're the one that doesn't complain. Because again, if you see things like me, you're thinking, okay, well, it's not a big deal. It's fine, But you have to temper that with judgment and self-control and self-care. And you have to look out for yourself. So it's a bit of a warning to those who are very positive to say, okay, be positive, but don't get taken advantage of. You also have to be careful of just pushing through something because you enjoy being positive so much. Well, I'm not going to let it get to me. Well, maybe sometimes it should. Maybe sometimes something should get to you so that you have an equal and opposite reaction to something that's pushing upon you. Remember what I talked about with the people you work with and the negative people and so forth? There's that person who has that magic ability to just defer work and defer issues and, oh, don't give it to her. All she's going to do is complain. Well, so you never give her that? No, all the work flows around that person to other people, and especially people like you positive person you. You have to be watchful of that. And maybe it's this in the back of your mind that prevents you from being a bit more positive. Maybe you actually have a fear. You've developed a fear of being positive because you think you're going to be taken advantage of. Very much something worth reflecting on after this podcast. Think about that. The positivity psych charm. I designed it to be something very simple, an upward-facing arrow. And because of the way the charms are designed, there is an up and a down, and so that was a huge advantage for me to do that. The up arrow can tell you, yes, you are a positive person and you should feel good about yourself. It can tell you and remind you, maybe you need to be a little bit more positive and you've been trying. It can remind you that when things go down, maybe they're going to continue to go up and that things will eventually go up. It can remind you that there are people in your life that are a bit down and that your positivity is a shining light to them. It can also be used alternatively if you are trying to be upwardly mobile. You're saying, hey, I'm going to make it in this field, and that's my little arrow that points me up. If you are a spiritual or religious person, it can kind of point your head in the direction that you think all the good stuff comes from. And it can remind you to elevate the conversation, because sometimes you get stuck in conversations and there's nowhere to go but up. Thank you as always. I hope you enjoyed this because I did. Take care.
Living life every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.
Do you have a story to share or a question? If your idea makes it to a podcast, you'll receive a shout out as well as a token of my appreciation. Join the community, patreon.com/alchemy for life.
All I need are some better days.